The First World War is most often remembered through daylight images. Long lines of soldiers crossing open ground, trenches carved into muddy fields, artillery silhouetted against gray skies. Yet for much of the war, the most decisive hours unfolded not under the sun, but beneath the cover of darkness. Night was not merely the absence of light. It was an entirely different battlefield, governed by fear, silence, altered senses, and fragile control. As the war dragged on and front lines hardened into immobile scars across continents, daylight became dangerous. Visibility meant vulnerability. Artillery observers watched from balloons and towers. Machine guns dominated open ground. Any movement under the sun risked immediate death. Slowly, inevitably, the war migrated into the night. Darkness reshaped everything: tactics, psychology, time, and the human mind itself. Night did not belong to one side or another. It belonged to uncertainty. Before the war, night had been a boundary. It separated labor from rest, activity from sleep, danger from safety. During World War I, that boundary dissolved. Night became an extension of combat rather than its pause. Soldiers learned to invert their lives. Daylight was for hiding, repairing, waiting. Night was for movement. Supplies were carried forward after sunset. Trenches were repaired in darkness. Wire was laid. Patrols sent out. Wounded retrieved when possible. Entire offensives were prepared under cover of night, their success dependent on silence and precision. Time lost its familiar structure. Hours blended together. Men slept in fragments, never deeply, always alert. Watches were checked obsessively, not for comfort, but for survival. Midnight, dawn, and dusk carried tactical meaning rather than emotional significance. The war did not sleep, it only dimmed. Night offered protection, but it demanded a price. In darkness, soldiers could move without immediately drawing fire. Stretcher-bearers crawled into no man's land to retrieve wounded bodies left behind after failed attacks. Engineers repaired trenches destroyed by shelling. Patrols slipped forward to listen, observe, and probe enemy defenses. Yet darkness also removed certainty. Shapes lost definition. Sounds traveled unpredictably. A shadow could be a tree stump, a corpse, or an enemy crouching silently with a bayonet. The mind filled gaps with fear. Men learned to listen differently at night. Footsteps carried meaning. Breathing sounded louder. Metal scraped against metal became a warning. A cough could betray a position. Silence itself became suspicious. In daylight, fear was visible and external. At night, it became internal. No man's land was a place of death during the day, but at night it transformed into something even more unsettling. The shattered ground between trenches remained filled with craters, wire, debris, and bodies. But darkness stripped it of clear boundaries. Patrols moved slowly, sometimes on hands and knees, memorizing terrain by touch rather than sight. A single misstep could send a man tumbling into a crater filled with water, mud, or decomposing remains. Barbed wire snagged uniforms and skin alike, its presence often discovered too late. The wounded who lay there during the day waited for night as their only chance of rescue. Some survived until darkness allowed stretcher teams to reach them. Others did not. Their calls, when they had the strength to make them, carried across the battlefield in the stillness, haunting those who heard but could not move. Night revealed the war's aftermath in its rawest form. Under moonlight or flares, the battlefield appeared frozen in a grotesque stillness. Helmets glinted faintly. Rifles lay half-buried. Bodies merged with earth. The night preserved everything the day sought to erase. Darkness was never complete. Both sides used flares to tear holes in the night sky. These sudden bursts of light turned night into day, without warning, illuminating trenches, wire, and exposed men caught mid-movement. A flare rising into the sky triggered instinctive reactions. Soldiers froze, pressed themselves into mud, or dropped flat, hoping to become part of the landscape before the light revealed them. The seconds felt endless. The flare did more than expose physical bodies. It exposed vulnerability. Men caught in the open understood how thin the line between concealment and death truly was. When the light faded, movement resumed, but with heightened tension. Night battles became a rhythm of darkness and violent illumination. Light was no longer comforting. It was lethal. Night intensified the importance of hearing. Vision failed, but sound dominated. Listening posts were pushed forward into no man's land under cover of darkness. Small teams lay in shallow pits or shell holes, straining to detect enemy movement. A misplaced step, whispered command, or metallic clink could reveal preparations for an attack. Sound carried farther at night. Wind direction mattered. Temperature affected acoustics. Soldiers learned to distinguish between natural noises and human ones, the difference between a rat and a footstep, a branch breaking and wire being cut. The battlefield became an auditory landscape. Fear sharpened perception, but also distorted it. Men imagined sounds that were not there. Anxiety turned silence into menace. The night trained soldiers to mistrust their senses even as they depended on them. Some of the most brutal fighting occurred at night, not in mass assaults, but in raids. Small groups crossed into enemy trenches with specific objectives: capture prisoners, destroy equipment, gather intelligence. These raids relied on speed, surprise, and overwhelming violence in confined spaces. In darkness, combat became intimate. Distance vanished. Weapons were used at arm's length. Confusion reigned. Friend and enemy were sometimes indistinguishable. A moment's hesitation could be fatal. After the raid, survivors withdrew quickly, dragging prisoners and wounded back through darkness, pursued by confusion and retaliatory fire. Night raids left lasting psychological scars. The closeness of violence, the silence before and after, and the uncertainty of what had occurred haunted participants long after daylight returned. Above the trenches, the war expanded into the night sky. Aircraft initially avoided nighttime operations, but necessity forced adaptation. Reconnaissance flights, bombing raids, and patrols began to occur after sunset. Pilots navigated by stars, rivers, and faint ground lights. Anti-aircraft fire painted the sky with bursts of light. Searchlights swept upward, hunting aircraft like predators. Cities under threat learned to darken themselves. enforcing blackouts that erased familiar landmarks. For civilians, night bombing introduced a new terror. The darkness concealed the approach of aircraft until engines roared overhead and explosions followed. Sleep became shallow, punctured by alarms and fear. The night sky, once associated with calm and wonder, became another front. The human body suffered differently in darkness. Cold intensified after sunset. Damp uniforms clung to skin. Exhaustion deepened. Hunger felt sharper. Fatigue blurred judgment. Muscles stiffened during long, silent watches. Sleep deprivation became universal. Men learned to rest while standing, sitting, or leaning against trench walls. Dreams bled into waking life. Hallucinations were not uncommon. Night amplified loneliness. Thoughts wandered to home, to past lives that felt increasingly unreal. The darkness gave space for memory and dread to mingle. Psychological strain accumulated faster at night. Many soldiers reported that fear felt heavier in darkness, less rational, but more consuming. The mind, unoccupied by visible tasks, turned inward. The war did not need to attack at night. The night itself did the work. Yet night also created moments of unexpected humanity. In the quiet hours, soldiers shared food, cigarettes, and whispered stories. Bonds formed in the shared vulnerability of darkness. Trust became essential. A man depended on the one beside him to remain alert, to recognize danger, to stay awake. Small rituals developed. Watches were checked together. Equipment was adjusted by feel. Silent signals replaced shouted commands. The night fostered a different kind of discipline, one based not on visibility and order, but on restraint and awareness. These moments did not erase fear, but they made it bearable. Weather and night combined into a formidable force. Fog thickened darkness into blindness. Rain amplified sound and discomfort. Snow reflected moonlight, making concealment difficult. Wind distorted noise and movement. Each condition altered the night's character. Soldiers learned to read the sky and air as carefully as maps. A clear night promised danger from flares and snipers. A storm offered concealment, but also misery. Weather dictated whether night would be friend or enemy. Beyond the Western Front, night shaped warfare differently, but no less profoundly. In deserts, night offered relief from heat, but introduced disorientation. Stars guided movement, but distances became deceptive. Sound traveled far across open landscapes. In mountains, darkness made paths treacherous. Slopes disappeared into voids. A misstep could send a man tumbling into nothingness. At sea, night concealed submarines and convoys alike. Navigation depended on skill and luck. A single light could mean destruction. Across continents, night adapted the war to its environment. As the war dragged into its final years, night became synonymous with endurance. Men who had survived countless nights no longer feared darkness itself, but the memories it carried. Night reminded them of past raids, lost comrades, and moments when survival felt accidental. When the armistice came, it arrived in the morning, but the night lingered. Soldiers slept without fear of sudden orders for the first time in years, yet many found rest elusive. Silence felt unfamiliar. The war's nights did not end when the guns fell silent. They followed survivors home, returning in dreams and wakeful hours long after peace was declared. Night remains central to how the war is remembered. Battlefields visited today feel different at dusk. Shadows stretch, sounds change. The absence of daylight restores something of the war's original atmosphere. Monuments stand silent under stars. The earth holds memories invisible by day. Night preserves the emotional truth of the conflict more faithfully than sunlight ever could. The war at night was not simply a continuation of day. It was a parallel reality, one that stripped war of spectacle and reduced it to fear, endurance, and survival. World War I was fought across maps and calendars, but it was endured minute by minute, often in darkness. The night tested patience, nerve, and humanity more relentlessly than daylight battles ever could. It was in the night that men listened hardest, feared deepest, and hoped quietly. It was in the night that the war revealed itself not as a series of heroic moments, but as a sustained assault on the senses and spirit. The sun rose and set. The war did not care. And in the long history of human conflict, few nights were heavier, longer, or more unforgiving than those spent waiting in the trenches of the First World War.